Hey folks, join us on today's exciting episode as we preview what may be coming next week with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's release of their Waterfowl Population Status Report and the harvest reports that come along with that. We talk about what we kind of expect. We talk about how that information is going to inform future harvest regulations. And then we look back on some of the historical changes in adaptive harvest management. Lots of great information. Stay with us.
Can we do a mic check, please?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brasher.
I'm your host, Katie Burke.
I'm your host, Dr. Jerad Henson. And I'm your host, Matt Harrison.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. The DU Podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, the official performance dog food of Ducks Unlimited. Purina Pro Plan, always advancing. Also proudly sponsored by Bird Dog Whiskey and Cocktails. Whether you're winding down with your best friend or celebrating with your favorite crew, Bird Dog brings award-winning flavor to every moment. Enjoy responsibly.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I am Dr. Mike Brasher. I'm going to be, I guess, one of three kind of co-hosts on this episode. We're here recording on August 19th. And this is typically the time of year when we are typically the week when we're anticipating breeding population survey results. We don't have those this year. We're going to tell you a little bit about that. Joining me here in studio is Nathan Ratchford. Nathan, great to have you.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be here.
And over here, Dr. Jerad Henson. Jerad, great to be with you as well.
Mike, great to be here.
We, as I said, this is typically the week of the year when we are running around like chickens with our heads cut off and doing all sorts of preparation for the release of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Waterfowl Population Status Report. That's not happening this week. This year. We're going to tell you here in a moment when we think that's going to happen. You're probably listening to this actually on August 28th, if all of our math works out right. So we don't have the report by then either, if you're listening to this. And so give you a hint then as to when it's going to come out. But this is an exciting time. Jerad, you're probably eager to get these numbers.
I am. I'm excited. I think everybody, too, is still riding a little high from, the expo we just had.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic event. Coming off of that, everybody's starting to get geared up around duck season, which is needed right now because it's 100 degrees actual temp outside in Memphis right now. It's got us dreaming of cooler temperatures and that time of year getting here, but the excitement starts to build. We really want to know what to expect this year, and that's kind of where we're hoping these numbers are going to get us to.
Nathan, you were deep into the conversation last year. This time, I think it might have been this very week.
I think so.
Again, we're recording this August 19th, so you're going to be listening to this on August 28th. So just we'll try to keep that, try not to confuse you on those dates. But nevertheless, mid-late August is when we were deep into numbers and paperwork and communication planning, and all that stuff is still going on right now, but we don't anticipate the results for, let's just say, another week. But It's a little bit different for you this year. Do you feel like we are having to wait, but it's like we're getting antsy?
Yeah, so last year was my first time helping on the communication side of things, so it was a bit of a learning curve for sure. I feel more comfortable this year, but it's all hands on deck. It's, as you mentioned, it's a little crazy around the office this time of year, but we're moving towards September. We're going to have dove opening, teal.
That's
it's
right.
a great time of year. Yeah.
It's kind of crazy to think we're going to have, well, I guess some folks already do. There are some early goose seasons already open.
I saw some of our friends from our partner organizations that were getting out in the field already up in the Dakotas and chasing some of those early resident geese. I mean, our resident goose season opens in a couple weeks here.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe when it's 100 out there now.
It's pretty tough.
Yeah, I'm disappointed. I did a little bit of, sort of vegetation management there on our property. We have 16 acres. About 8 or 9 of that is actually sort of open field. Mm-hmm. Last year or 2 years ago, I had mowed it at just the right time, and it had grown up into this, I don't know if it's Dallas grass or some sort of seed producing grass that the resident, Canada geese came in, were eating. And so, yeah, I harvested a few of those and made some goose
I'm still waiting for my invitation, by the way.
Well, there's likely will not be one forthcoming this year because as I was leading into, I'm kind of disappointed in the response or the lack of response from that kind of vegetation. I didn't mow it this year, but I think I had let all of the other sort of more robust goldenrod and other type of thing take over, and it didn't really.
Right.
I think I have to do some additional manipulation to kind of get it back to that grass stage, if that's what I want to do with it. So I don't know if we're going to get any Canada geese there on the property this year.
An early, incredibly wet spring kind of set the ecological succession, all those different grasses.
Yeah, it kind of boomed.
It did some,
Yeah.
It made some
think about
changes.
that. So anyway, Canada geese around our house are probably safe this year. Rebecca will be kind of happy with that. She does not like me shooting out of the smallest flock, but there's a larger flock that sometimes comes by, and I have the okay to shoot that one. So we kind of go, you got to compromise. And so we sort of go along with it. But I don't expect them to be on the property this year. So what we wanted to do with this episode is sort of whet our appetite for what will be, we hope, forthcoming next week, first week of September, is when we do anticipate the Fish and Wildlife Service releasing the Waterfowl Population Status Report, as well as the Adaptive Harvest Management Report, and several other reports that lay out the recommendations for harvest strategies, harvest regulations for the 26-27 season. Nothing that we're going to get next week, as you're listening to this, will change the regulations for 25 for this coming season. So just kind of keep that in mind. And what we wanted to do is just provide a bit of a primer on some of the things that you'll be hearing. Make sure we have an extra week to sort of put things in context, to hit on some interesting reminders, and look back a little bit at what some of the things were last year. And so, you're looking forward to kind of getting into this?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a thing we've been talking about it a lot over the past couple of years. It's been dry, and so everyone's interested to see what those populations are going to look like. What's the habitat look like? And that's both the two things that we're looking to get out of the BPOP report, right? Is that what is the breeding population? What's it look like? And then also, how good's the habitat, right? Can ducks make bank or not?
Well, we've kind of previewed that with Scott Stevens, Steve Adair. We're not anticipating highly favorable numbers either from the breeding population, the duck numbers or the pond numbers. But we'll know soon enough.
Right.
And
Scott always said one word: dry.
He did say that.
I was at DUX. I was on a podcast. Somebody asked me kind of what I thought about it, and I was like, well, it was dry 2 years ago. It was dry last year. Early reports are it's pretty dry this year, and the BPOP has been consistent over that same population. So I would not expect any drastic change, right?
Yeah,
for the better, for sure.
Right,
based upon what we know right now.
Right. One of the first things that we wanted to do, we sort of alluded to this, but a specific mention and thank you to our federal, both U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Canadian Wildlife Service, our provincial partners, our state agency partners. They are the ones that conduct these surveys. There were a lot of questions going into the spring on whether these surveys were even going to happen.
Yeah, they were.
Hats off to every person involved in the discussions and decisions that allowed this to happen. I don't have any insight on whether they had to. I mean, there was some speculation early on that maybe they would, because budgets are getting squeezed
that was
every
part of that
year.
Budget concern, right? Yeah.
And there was some thought that maybe they would have to reduce the number of transects that they fly, or maybe even not fly some strata. I don't know how all that ended up. I think we'll probably hear about that in the report or from some of our partners directly. But they got it done, and kudos to those folks for doing the hard work to make sure that happened.
Yes. Yeah.
No small effort.
No, not at all. And that's, I mean, we need that. That data is so important for us to make informed decisions. And when I say us, I mean our partners, the waterfowl science community as a whole, to be able to make informed decisions on population management and how to go forth.
Yeah. One of the first things that we want to do, I have a few slides here. If you're listening to this, we're going to be putting up some slides, some images to remind folks, give some visual perspective to the type of things that you'll be hearing about next week. Some of this may be old hat to a number of folks, but when we get the report, we'll be talking about, and whenever you see the duck numbers come out on the Ducks Unlimited social media or Ducks Unlimited webpage, you will hear us talking about the traditional survey area as well as the eastern survey area. And so we're showing now a map of the areas that correspond to those survey areas. There's a long history about how this came to be. They've evolved over time. We're not going to get into those details, but these are the two big survey areas across which duck populations are estimated separately. They'll be reported separately in that report and every other place where you see them. So the traditional survey area encompasses important breeding habitats in Alaska, the Northwest Territories, and northern Canada, the prairie provinces of Canada over to western Ontario, and then down through Montana and North and South Dakota. That's a traditional survey area, primarily providing ducks to the Pacific, Central, and Mississippi flyways. Of course, they'll provide ducks to the Atlantic Flyway also. But then you go over to the Eastern Survey area, which is you essentially take Central Ontario and go eastward through Canada and into Maine, and that captures the Eastern Survey area, largely more stable wetland system, boreal forest type of community, and that's going to be a big provider of the ducks that the Atlantic Flyway gets.
Right. And just looking at that, a couple things to point out, especially in that traditional survey area. Well, I know we didn't want to go too much in the history, but that's really cool that this year's basically 70 years.
You're right.
Of that survey. So that's an incredible data set from an ecological standpoint. And I think that's important to point out. It actually goes back further than that, but it was standardized in 55. And so that's kind of a really cool thing to talk about, that we have that data set to actually make informed decisions off of. And one of the other things that I always find interesting, people ask me, when they look at that traditional survey map, I was like, well, it's a weird survey lines. Some of those areas get way more flight lines, and some of them get just a few. And that's an artifact of the habitat, right? And the duck densities on those habitats, right? So the flight lines, those transect lines are laid out based upon estimated duck densities, so they can get better counts.
Statistically rigorous design. It's not just willy-nilly. It's like, oh, well, this I don't care about this area as much. We're only going to put one transect there. No, it is based on the things that you talk about, Jerad. What we've learned from years of collecting data, and as you mentioned, they'll modify this occasionally. I know there was a big revision of the survey in 1995, I think, or at least that's when there was a publication that came out. I know there's some ongoing work and ongoing discussion right now to consider potential modifications to the survey. Those types of things are in some way or another always happening. Sometimes the changes that are made are a bit more substantial than others. Sometimes they're just little minor tweaks or changes in the way they estimate sampling variation or statistical sort of changes. So, but always working to get the best estimates possible, the best data possible. Nathan, I know last year you wrote an article that summarized all the state surveys. And so when we're looking at this map, there are a number of states that have breeding duck populations that are not on here. You learned a little bit about some of that last year.
Yes, I did. California being one, Oregon and Washington, and British Columbia, provincial partner there. That data is also used, and I know we'll cover it later as a part of that larger data set for informed decisions on certain flyway regulations. And up in the Great Lakes area, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and am I missing anyone?
Those are the three big ones in the Great Lakes.
Yeah,
there may
Great
be
Lakes.
some other localized surveys. I don't
Yeah.
know if Ohio does a breeding duck survey. I don't think they do. They might have at one time. There are a few breeding ducks up in Ohio,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So,
And then the
it's-
northeastern states, they don't show up in this one here, but there are some formalized surveys, breeding duck surveys in the northeastern states, which we will talk about a little
and how they're
later
conducted
on.
is a bit different. Yep.
But in terms of what is captured by the traditional survey area and the eastern survey area, it's pretty well defined, and it does not capture all of those areas that we know contain breeding ducks. Although we'll get to some of those surveys and how they're
Sure.
important a little bit later on. So let's see. One of the other things, I guess, just sort of to point out is, Jerad, you hit on it, 70 years of this waterfowl breeding population and habitat survey. We've talked also recently about banding programs. We've talked about harvest surveys. We've talked about the breeding population survey that is conducted in the spring. Not only provides estimates of breeding ducks, but habitat estimates across the prairies. Those data sets are at the foundation of our informed management for both population management and harvest management, and the conservation that Ducks Unlimited, our partners, and other organizations deliver. They are the data sets that have for so many years kept North American waterfowl management sort of at the top of the mountain of science-based wildlife management. And we've had conversations earlier this year, and people have heard about it, where we thought some of those programs were at risk. It is fair to say that the budgets for those programs and those activities have been constrained for many years. That has not changed. If anything, it's kind of gotten worse over the past number of years. And so that's always a concern to us. And so that's why we're always eager to point out the importance of those data sets and the defining nature that they have for what we are as a community, as a waterfowl management community, and why it's important where every chance we get to support the people that do it, to support the programs that deliver that. But then also think about new and exciting and innovative ways to collect that type of data, but then additional data as we go forward. We have to always be improving and adapting to environmental changes, social changes, budgetary changes, those types of things.
Changes.
Technology, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff going on right now, but we can never lose sight of the importance of these foundational data sets. So always have to sort of make that note.
Well, and Mike, just kind of follow up on that is you mentioned some revisions to some of this stuff, and some of those things take time, right, for those revisions to be adapted and kind of carried out. And one of the big things is to make sure that the data as it's collected, it can be compared to the old data, right? So we need to make sure as we find new technologies and we find new ways of measuring these things that they always take into account how we've done things in the past so that we can compare apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. And I think that's an important thing. Because people ask all the time, why don't you use this for looking at those, these new technologies or something? Why do we not use that? I was like, well, we got to make sure that it's comparing the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Thinking about where I want to go next in this conversation, I have two options. I think, so Chris, I've brought up on the screen here the results from last year's survey. Maybe we'll just do that as a reminder for people. One of the big things that folks might recall, the headline from last year was an estimated 8% increase in mallard numbers, an estimated 5% increase in total duck numbers for the traditional survey area. What you're looking at here would be the numbers from last year as Ducks Unlimited put those out. Again, this is last year's, not this year's, it's 2024. But just as a reminder of some of the notable things. But if you look out in that far right column, the percent change from the long-term average, mallards were still down 16% below the long-term average. Gadwall were up, widgeon were up, green-winged teal still above the long-term average. But then you had species like blue-winged teal, which were below the long-term average by 10%. Pintails still down, 50% below the long-term average last year. And then you look at canvasback and scaup, and so this just gives you a reminder of where we were last year. I think it is a safe general characterization would be to say that overall duck populations in the traditional survey area were about average. Some species were below that, some species were above that, but overall we're in this period of average duck populations. And when you have a period of average duck population size that is about 7 or 8 years after record highs, it feels like that drop is much steeper. It feels like where we are is so much lower than what it actually is when you look at it over a time frame. It's like this. What is your time frame of reference? For a lot of young hunters, the time frame of reference is going to be, I say, 2010 through 2010 through now. And the first part of that were very healthy duck populations and record duck populations. And so now when we're back down to an overall average, then it feels like it hurts.
It does. And kind of one of the things that comes to mind too is not only are we getting these very average, but we're also getting, especially the past 2 to 3 years, had some weird climate, right? Warm, right? And so, people in my neck of the woods, Arkansas, Mississippi, that area, like, you're not seeing as much as you normally would because it's 80 degrees in November.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A duck doesn't need or want to be in 80-degree weather.
Right. And last year, I don't think we had that real cold weather until January.
It was, right. Yeah, right. And so that's a whole conversation in itself. But not only is it the average numbers, but you combine those average numbers with some pretty warm winters, and you're not seeing the birds further south like we did before when we had cooler winters with a cool winter with a healthy population of ducks.
Yeah.
That's a great point though, Mike. I mean, I'm looking at the graph here for mallards in 2016, nearly 11.8 million mallards. So, I mean, that's
double.
It's
double.
So
it's
if you're thinking there's
double.
less ducks around or speculating that we're missing ducks in the survey, they're not out there.
Right.
Imagine being perplexed and puzzled if the stock market went down 50% and you looked at your 401k and says, doggone, why is my 401k down 50%? Well, it's down because the stock market went down 50%. So that's a pretty useful analogy to say you can't look at one of your experiences and say, I'm not seeing as many ducks right now. This has to be somebody's fault.
Right.
And then also acknowledge and see that at the continental level, we are down close to 50% on one of these species. And it checks out.
I've had that conversation several times over the past year as somebody will come up to me, man, they're just missing something in the surveys. They're missing it. I'm just not seeing the ducks. I was like, well, if your frame of reference is 2016, when we had fantastic years, and you feel like you're only seeing maybe half the number of ducks, if you look at the reports, the survey, it shows there's half the number of ducks is that frame of reference. So keeping that in perspective is really important.
And just how cyclical these things are, right?
Yeah.
You go back 10 years before in 2006, and we're about mallard-wise where we are right now, right?
Yep.
So that difference when rain returns, how that, actually continues to build the population year after year, and then you have something like 2016.
And if you look at those, the mallard population, right, or overall duck population, you can look at it and you see those cyclical peaks and troughs that you would normally see with any type of wildlife population.
And some people may think that we're looking at this through rose-colored glasses, but I think we're just trying to be honest about it. And to that point, if you look at the depth of the drought and the widespread nature of the drought across that prairie region for the past essentially 7 years, and we still have total duck populations in the traditional survey area that are right around the long-term average, it's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
It's pretty darn good. Now, you can look at some species and see they are hurting more than others. Mallard,
Sure.
pintail. Looking at this blue-winged teal, that's a bit of a surprise, being 10% below the long-term average, because we think that's one that is generally highly resilient. But then you look at species like greenwings, widgeon. They're more likely to inhabit the boreal forest.
Right.
Despite the drought that's been going on in the boreal forest, they've been able to kind of hold their own, and they have helped prop up that overall total duck population. So to be right around long-term average speaks to the resilience. It's not rose-colored glasses. That's just sort of the reality of what it is, especially whenever you look at all of the other challenges and changes and loss of habitat in that important prairie region. Ducks are resilient, and we're all eager to see what we get next week.
And conservation is a long-term game.
Sure is.
Right?
That it is, yeah.
The table needs to be set. There needs to be habitat available for when the rain returns. And, the continental mission that we have here at Ducks Unlimited, Mike, you mentioned the Northwest Territory showed up big last year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
We anticipate that to happen again. So expect a big count out of there.
So the boreal, Alaska, these other landscapes that we do work on that are also essential. It's just, you can't just be looking at it through a microscope. You need to be looking at the whole picture, and that's what Ducks Unlimited does.
Yeah. I've got a graph or a little table up now, the 2024 Eastern Survey area. And it was a bright spot last year, has been the last several years. The habitat conditions in that landscape are not as variable as they are in the prairies. They have not, a lot of that landscape is boreal forest, this matrix of coniferous forest and wetlands of various types. It has not suffered the same level of drought that the boreal forest in Western Canada has. Right. And I think it appears that it bears that out, where you've got several duck populations above long-term average: black ducks, green-winged teal, goldeneye, mergansers, ringneck ducks right about long-term average, wood ducks long-term average, mallards only down 9% from long-term average. So, this is one of those times when, if you're an Atlantic flyway hunter, you kind of even keel. Your expectations are about what they were last year, and that's generally the case. I think other people have even told us that. Maybe Mike Schumer or maybe it's Scott Stevens. Like, your best prediction of what you're going to get in the Eastern Survey area this year is probably what you had last year, and that's not too far off. So anyway, these are 2024 numbers, just to kind of orient folks before we get the numbers next week. Hopefully that will be the case. And so what else we want to talk about in terms of setting the stage for sort of our population habitat estimates? We haven't really talked about May ponds. I think we're probably expecting a drop.
Based on those early reports, I think that's the realistic thing to do. And seemed like it was across the board.
Yeah.
Right. It wasn't. There's a few pockets here and there that had average to good.
Yeah.
It seemed like from those reports. I think there were some good reports out of the Missouri Coteau. Like that area had some better habitat, but still not great or good.
Yeah.
It's still like, it's fair. That's kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if you get on up into Saskatchewan, it seemed like there was a lot of dry wetlands up there.
Yeah. There definitely were. The pilot reports were not ideal. There was some rain that arrived on the prairies, but I think our read is that most of that came after the surveys were flown. So and came after the birds, many of the early migrants flew into that landscape. That's why we're expecting the number out of the boreal to be high again this year, as that's where we anticipate some of those birds having overflown and settled in.
And it was so dry before those rains. A lot of that reports of those.
Oh yeah,
that ground soaked it up quick
for sure.
So.
From just an average hunter's perspective, reading those reports, it's always difficult though finding getting a pulse on what it's actually going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, last year I felt like the reports are mainly bleak as well, but then you had a huge variability. Across U.S. ponds were up substantially, where Canadian ponds were down. 19%. U.S. ponds were up 40-some%.
I think that's
Wave?
right. Yeah. It was
Yeah.
up huge.
So it's the variability of that landscape, and also it's just, I don't know what to expect.
So the pond numbers last year, I didn't look at that. It was it up in, I don't have that in this graphic. You would be looking at it on the article.
49%
Up on the U.S.
actual number.
On the
Yep.
U.S. ponds are up 49%.
Dynamic.
That's not going to
landscape.
happen this year. They may be down 50%.
You think so?
Well, maybe. Maybe.
No rose-colored glasses here.
On the U.S. side of things, I don't know. 30% down on the U.S. I don't know.
It seemed,
I think it depends on what it was. If it goes back to what it was the year prior, what would that percent change be? I don't know. We'd have to look at that data. But yeah, it could be. I don't have any reason to believe that the pond count coming out of the U.S. this year is going to be very close to what it was last year. Now, I did hear something the other day that said maybe some of those rains came right before they flew some of those areas. But while that may help the pond number, it doesn't help the settling pattern.
No.
For the early migrants. It'll help. It'll provide some water for some of the later nesters as well as for some of the broods. But, there's ducks will still be produced. We've already heard reports of ducklings on the landscape in various provinces and states. So we know ducks are going to be produced. We know there's habitat up there. We don't want to sound like there's no production.
Right.
Because there will be.
Ducks are resilient.
Yep.
They're incredibly resilient. And they will find habitat.
Yeah.
And that's
will.
one of the really, really impressive things about waterfowl. They might fly over a dry prairie and end up in the boreal up there. And again, it's hard to estimate up there, right? It's dense, it's tree covered,
Yeah. And there were some good brood reports out of North Dakota this year too.
The brood numbers out of North Dakota were up. I always look at that with a bit of caution, especially during a year when it's so dry. I don't think they do visibility correction factors associated with that survey. So it depends on how dry it was. If it was so dry that by the time they conducted the brood surveys, that a lot of the water had receded out of the vegetation, then the broods aren't going to have much escape cover. And so your detection rate on broods is going to be higher. So there's some of that variability from year to year. It's like that counting wildlife in their natural setting is difficult.
It is. It is.
They don't want to be counted a lot of times.
Well, that's
like
one
the
of those,
ducklings especially.
That's one of those cases where some of that new technology is really cool,
Yeah.
being able to implement that using
That's right. Well, we talked about that on last
infrared
week's episode.
drone stuff. Yeah,
would have seen that.
That's a cool
And to your
thing.
point, Mike, I mean, weather patterns at the time of the surveys, all those things that factor in. We saw that with widgeon last year, right? That big increase. I think you kind of pointed to the survey the previous year. There was a weather pattern that may have influenced how many widgeon were observed in that Alaska Northwest Territory area.
Yeah,
right?
there was something weird about that.
that maybe was kind of the reason why there was that big increase. But all those things, it's dynamic for sure.
Yeah, there are some wonky things that occasionally, it's a technical term, wonky.
Wonky, yeah.
That do show up in these surveys from time to time, and that's unavoidable.
Yep.
It does not undermine the value of the survey. It does not.
Absolutely not.
It does not undermine the rigor with which this is designed and implemented, and the data are analyzed. It's just
nature.
It is a massive undertaking,
is.
and you're going to get a few of these areas where things are a little wonky from year to year.
It's a population estimate over time. And one of the things that's really cool about a data set that long, if you do it the same way over and over and over, no, you may not be able to spell out to the exact number, the number of ducks, there's +1 or +2. That's the different scale for the survey.
Yeah.
But if something happens with a population,
You're going to pick it up.
A trend change.
A true trend.
Trend, you will find it in this kind of data. And that's something that's so important to our ability to understand the populations.
That's a great point.
And is there really anything you can compare it to? I mean, as far as wildlife surveys.
You know, I would have to look at some of the fisheries data sets. I think they do a really good job in some instances. They probably have some of the longest records of others that have been out there. You know, the adaptive harvest management that we use right now, it was taken from some of the work that has been done in fisheries, stock management and sort of take management. So, yeah, I think some of the fisheries disciplines and groups have comparable data sets and decision, especially when you think on the commercial fisheries side of things, stock assessments and so forth. They have some pretty rigorous long-term data sets. So yeah, that's probably where I would compare it. But otherwise,
But for a single survey.
well, for a single survey and also for a species or group of species that varies so widely across a geographic area, I think, you would have to go to the fisheries groups to find anything comparable. So, but great point. I think now is a good time to take a break. We want to come back and we want to preview how some of this might influence harvest regulations for the 26-27 season. That's the other big thing that people will be looking to when the reports come out next week. We will be looking at that the same as you all, and we want to kind of get you prepared for what to look for, remind you of how harvest regulations for duck seasons are set across the different flyways. And also we're going to take a look at how the adaptive harvest management matrix for mid-continent mallards has changed over time, and it might surprise some of the folks out there that say AHM isn't adaptive. It actually is, and we're going to show you how. So stay with us. We got a lot more to come back. Hey, everyone, welcome back. I am Dr. Mike Brasher, and here I have Nathan Ratchford, Dr. Jerad Henson. We're going to pick up where we left off and jump right into sort of a primer on harvest regulations, how they are set, how those processes differ from one flyway to the next. And I think to start this off, Chris, if you could sort of show the image that we have up here that highlights regulations are set differently by flyway. The group of ducks, we're going to talk about duck regulations here. Geese are an entirely different thing. The group of ducks that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service looks to set regulations in your flyway is likely different from the set of ducks that are used to set it in another flyway, unless we're talking about the Central and Mississippi. Those are set using the same group of birds. So let's just spell this out here. If you're in the Pacific flyway, the group of birds that is important for setting the overall duck season framework, that being the number of days and the bag limits, is determined by the status of Alaska mallards and mallards that are estimated in British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California. If you are a hunter in the Central and Mississippi flyway, then your season length and bag limit for that overall duck framework are set based on the status of mid-continent mallards, which you see the surveys identified here in survey areas identified in green, plus the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan sort of capture that mid-continent mallard stock. So it's the estimate for mid-continent mallards plus the number of May ponds in the U.S. and Canada. So that's what determines your season structure. If you're in the Atlantic flyway, your season length and bag limit selection is based on the combined status of 4 species of ducks: ringneck ducks, wood ducks, golden eyes, and green-winged teal. We're not going to get into the specifics of every one of these. We're going to visit on the mid-continent mallard, the Central Mississippi flyway process, because that's the one that I think most people have. It's the one that's been around the longest. It's the one that I think most people are familiar with. But yeah, this is an important thing to know. So whenever that population status report comes out, and if you're a Pacific flyway hunter and you look at the traditional survey area, there's really only a part of that traditional survey area that is of greatest importance to you. Same thing if you're an Atlantic flyway hunter. Yeah, you'll look at the the eastern survey area. And what happens in the traditional survey area is important for the number of birds that you see. But if you're really looking at those numbers to try to figure out what your hunting season is going to be next year, then you're going to be looking only at what's happening in that sort of eastern area.
And this, and this kind of picks up on what we talked about before the break, right? We were talking about BPOP, and that's kind of what the whole topic of today is. This is the data from the BPOP and the Mapon count, all of that survey that's going to be used in the AHM report, right? To actually predict or estimate our harvest for not this year, but next year.
That's right. Yeah.
So
it really is incredible seeing, how many states we're looking at here and that individual data shared collectively in the waterfowl management community, and how efficiently and effectively that's done across so many different states. It's just really impressive.
There in the Atlantic Flyway, you see all of those states that are highlighted. Now, that relates to data that is collected through eBird, I believe, and maybe it's not eBird, it's the Breeding Bird Survey, I believe. I had to look this up. I've been talking about eBird so much, I'm confusing myself.
Yeah.
But they're not actual breeding duck population surveys that are conducted in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, et cetera. I think it's Breeding Bird Survey data that are used to help inform that wood duck estimate. That is one of those 4 species in the Atlantic Flyway. So just to kind of clarify why they're highlighted.
that's why those southern states are there is locally produced wood ducks.
Yeah.
Because that's opportunity for Atlantic Flyway hunters.
That's right.
That makes up a big part of their bag limits.
Yeah. Love a wood duck. Absolutely love a wood duck on a slow day. Or a fast day.
I love mine any day.
I know.
They taste amazing.
They do.
So there's that.
Yeah. So I mentioned the regulatory packages. That's what you would be most familiar with as restrictive, moderate, or liberal. Right. The number of days that are assigned to each of those options generally differs by flyway, which you see here in this table. For example, if you're in the Pacific Flyway, the restrictive season gives you 60 days. The liberal gives you 107. If you're in the Mississippi Flyway, the liberal gives you 60 days. The restrictive gives you 30. So you can kind of see how those things would change based on what that optimal regulatory package that would be selected is. These are fixed options that have in some periodic fashion been revisited. They're not revisited very often at all. These are pretty well fixed at this point.
And a lot of that, though, is set by, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's by estimated harvest. Is that correct? That's why that, say, Pacific Flyway.
Why they differ?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, there's some history there, and it is going to relate. Let's just look at the extreme from the Pacific to, let's say, the Mississippi. There are... I think the easy way to say it is that the ratio of hunters to number of ducks is lower than the ratio of hunters to ducks in the Mississippi Flyway.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
like relative harvest pressure is lower in the
and that's
Mississippi
kind of what I was trying to make a point there. Is that there's a reason those are different. It's to account for the amount of.
That's right.
And what's the old adage? Days kill ducks.
Days kill ducks, yeah.
Yeah.
So the other part of those sort of basic duck season framework is the bag limit. Those are also fixed under these different restrictive, moderate, and liberal options, and they differ, generally speaking, by flyway. Here in the Mississippi, and actually differ between the Mississippi and Atlantic Flyway, and I guess they differ across every one of these flyways. And the reason why the Atlantic, I'm thinking here on the fly, the reason why the Atlantic, okay, so I got to break this down here. So what you're seeing here is sort of 3 numbers in each of these categories. First is total ducks. The second is total mallards. And then you have hen mallards. If you notice in the Atlantic Flyway, there is no number associated with that second or third spot, for total mallards or hen mallards. That's because a few years ago, whenever they went to this multi-stock management model where they're basing it on those 4 different species, they pulled out mallards, a mallard bag limit as part of this basic package, and now they set that mallard bag limit separately based on the status of eastern mallards. So another one of those changes that have been made through the years.
Yeah, and it was just not that long ago that went from 3 to 4. If I'm
2 to 4. I believe
2 to
it was.
4.
Yeah,
2 to 4.
That's
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you will notice here, there's probably some things, if you stare at this, a lot of folks will be surprised when you go from a liberal to a moderate season in the Mississippi Flyway. I'm going to go back here and look at this. Yeah, the number of days changes from 60 to 45. The total bag limit stays the same. Total mallard stays the same, but you drop from 2 hens to 1. I'll be honest, I had forgotten that. Yeah. When you go from a liberal to a moderate season in the Mississippi Flyway and the Central Flyway, you lose 1 hen mallard from your bag. So, but you can still shoot 4 mallards or 5 mallards in the Central or in the Mississippi and Central respectively. Pacific Flyway has a 7-bird total bag. You can shoot 7 mallards in the Pacific Flyway under a liberal season. That might surprise some people, but again, it relates to what you're talking about, some differences in relative harvest pressure.
Right. Yeah.
So anything else there to take away? You could stare at that and find a few other interesting things. When you go to restrictive, the bag limit drops to 3 in the Atlantic, Mississippi, and Central. It drops to 4 in the Pacific. Only 2 mallards in the Mississippi Flyway, 3 in the Central. And interesting stuff. There are a lot of people that have never experienced anything other than that liberal season.
Yeah.
So they have no reason to pay attention to what those others are. Interesting. Okay, so the other thing of note, I've already mentioned this, is there are some species, black ducks, pintails, canvasbacks, redheads, blue-winged teal, mottled ducks, etc., that have their bag limit set separately within, outside of outside that duck season framework. And sometimes these species even have some restrictions on the days within a season when they can be harvested, a season within a season. All of these types of things are going to be spelled out in the report, the Adaptive Harvest Management Report that comes out, and we're not going to go into the details of how all those are done. So one of the important changes that folks will know as we are here on the cusp of teal season is that this year we only have a 9-day teal season. That was in response to a drop. In the breeding population size for blue-winged teal, and we've kind of covered that, I think, a little bit on a previous episode. May do it again at some point in the future. Don't want to get into that right now.
But in general, those additional species-specific regulations have to do with either a population concern, something different in their annual cycle, a specific habitat need, or some that are more impacted by hunter harvest than others. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
The data tells us, right, that I think in canvasbacks, right, like
they can be more sensitive to harvest. That's right.
Hunter harvest can have an impact there, so we need to be aware of that, and the data does, right, and the regulations are aware of that and are informed by that.
And those are specific guidelines too. Right. With blue wings, that was established 2014, right, by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That threshold. So they're not. I think it's just important for our audience to know that's not year to year. These are specific guidelines that these changes are made.
And most of those have a working scientific group that helps inform those decisions, right, around those specific species. It's not from a big general model for the general estimates. So.
Yeah. The other reminder here is that states can always be more restrictive than what those frameworks allow. Right. There have actually been some discussions in recent years, this year, about in some states considering a stronger sort of hen restriction. Some states, I know at least one state that considered going from 2 hen mallards to just 1 hen mallard. I don't think that was instituted. I don't have as good of a read on what some of the other states on the Atlantic or Pacific Flyway may be considering, but they always have that option to be more restrictive if they want to.
Right.
And individual hunters can certainly be more restrictive.
Well, that's the thing.
Regulations
when
allow,
you get
or
into
a club or whatever,
especially into talk about mallards and hen mallards, because that's been a topic of contention. But the data that has come out, I don't know the exact numbers, so don't quote me on this, but most bag limits, if someone shoots a limit of mallards in Arkansas of a four duck limit, it's like 3.5 or 3.8% or 3.8 of those 4 ducks are drakes, right? So people shoot more drakes.
People like to shoot the drakes.
Right? It's the pretty duck. It's the ones coming in. There's generally a drake bias, a male bias in those populations. So, but big old green top definitely catches my eye first.
I know. There's a lot of reasons to do that. There are, a lot of reasons to do that. If somebody wants to only shoot drakes, I'm cool with that. If somebody wants to shoot
if you got that opportunity,
two mallard hens, I mean, personally, I'm okay with that. To each their own. If that hen harvest becomes a driving factor in population growth, then those types of things will be caught at some point. And so just to the point of it's a topic of discussion right now, and that's great. That's the other thing we'll always say is that I think it's wonderful that people like to nerd out on what
they care.
They do.
They do. That's it. People care, and the thing is the data tells us that people self-regulate.
Yeah.
Right.
I only shoot mergansers, so
there you go.
Shooting those lawn darts as they fly by.
Conservationists for the dabblers, man. Dabbler's best friend, Nathan Ratchford, right here in the flesh. So I think what we want to do here is just sort of step through an example, the optimal regulatory strategy for the Central Mississippi Flyway from last year. We've got a brightly colored matrix here. Across the top, it says U.S. and Canadian May ponds in millions. Across the side, it says mid-continent mallard breeding population. You'll recall that map we showed a little while ago that highlighted the states that contribute to that population estimate for the mid-continent mallard stock, that being the prairie states of prairie provinces, prairie states in the U.S., and then those 3 Great Lakes states. That would be that mid-continent mallard breeding population estimate there. U.S. and Canadian May ponds, well, that comes from the estimates that are collected from North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, in those prairie strata. And then this simplified decision matrix is an emergent property of some very complex stochastic dynamic programming that considers 4 alternative models for predicting population size next year based on population size this year, breeding habitat conditions, and then different regulatory packages.
Yep.
And then in consideration of adaptive harvest management objectives, this stochastic dynamic programming says, here's a matrix that will identify, based on the intersection of these 2 key variables, what your optimal harvest strategy for this year is. That's a mouthful, but that's about as simple as I can explain it.
Mike, can you describe optimal?
No.
It's opportunity, right? They're trying to provide the most opportunity in a way, if it's there.
It's a number of things. It is the decision that maximizes the return for a set of objectives, not just one objective.
Right.
It's a set of objectives. And so that's kind of the way to think about it. It's not best for any single objective. Like harvest regulations represent a decision. That is a decision that is made every year. That decision has some true outcome. What we try to do, or what the Fish and Wildlife Service and their colleagues try to do, is predict that outcome with the greatest certainty possible. That outcome has an effect on our ability to achieve multiple objectives. One of those objectives is long-term sustainability of the populations.
Right.
Another objectives is maximization of harvest during every given year without compromising our ability to achieve that maximum harvest perpetually over time.
The next year, right.
There are also some objectives related to simplification of regulations, which may not be as explicitly accounted for. There's a few other objectives as well. So you have multiple objectives. And so optimization tries to select that regulatory package during a given year given the population and habitat status that is most likely to maximize the return for all of those objectives.
Right. Okay.
So
yeah. That's what I was trying to get at. Yes.
That's the best of my recollection.
No, and I think that's really important to frame, right, why this is used, why this AHM model, what this strategy or the regulatory strategy actually is mapping out in front of us. It's a balance of all of the stakeholders in here and trying to get the most optimum decision and framework for the next year's season to meet all those different objectives. And I think that's really important to point out, because that's in the weeds of the report. People don't see that.
Oh, yeah.
They don't read that. They don't, and a lot of people don't understand that. So that was something that I was glad you clarified, because I think that helps allow us to dive into this and actually understand why this is happening.
Anytime I try to explain that, it takes me back to when I was at Ohio State for my PhD, and I took some behavioral ecology course, and there was a lab session where there was a stochastic dynamic programming session. I ended up not taking that lab session because I had some other conflict, and so I missed out on the fun of stochastic dynamic programming. But I nevertheless had to do a bit of a term paper that that represented an example of this optimal modeling, trying to make a decision that is going to sort of maximize the contributions to a suite of sort of competing, interacting objectives. And I chose adaptive harvest management, mid-continent mallard adaptive harvest management as my case study. And it's when you take the time to dig into it, it's actually really cool how they framed it up and how they would, how that worked. I'd have to go back and read all of that. It just made me even more impressed by the people, the mathematicians, statisticians that do all of this work. And it makes a lot of sense when you spend the time to think about it. But it's been probably 2 decades since I thought about it that deeply. So what we're going to do right here is look at what we had for last year. I think I've got this animated, and we do. So we have this up here. And you will see that those are the results from the survey last year, from the combined surveys last year. 6.61 million mallards in the mid-continent population. It's a subset of those TSA strata plus those 3 Great Lakes states, and then 5.16 million U.S. and Canadian ponds. And so that's where you see where we ended up there in the liberal. You could probably say, well, that's a pretty far ways from moderate or restrictive. But while that's true, the appearance of this matrix, the territory, if you will, occupied by the liberal package and by the restrictive package in this sort of common domain, this common space, changes from year to year. Sometimes it changes more than others. So we don't know, even if we could predict perfectly what May ponds and the mid-continent mallard breeding population size is going to be right now, we don't know with confidence where we would end up. We would have some very informed opinions, but we also know that there's a good likelihood that where these L's, where these M's, where these R's find themselves on this matrix are going to change a little bit between this year, with this next report. So we kind of have to wait and see.
And that's based upon the performance of the models from the years before and how the different models are weighted. It's
those 4 competing models that capture hypotheses about additive mortality, compensatory mortality, and then strongly density-dependent recruitment and weakly density-dependent recruitment, which is about as far as I want to go with that right now. So
I think that's sufficient.
But other than to say each of those models will make a prediction for what the population size in next year is going to be, and then whenever the data are collected, the analysts have this formal process where they will compare, they'll look at the predicted versus the observed, and the model that did the best job predicting what next year's population was going to be gets a little bit more weight. And with each passing year, additional weight is assigned, additional predictions and comparisons are made. And the model what you would love to see is these things trend in a direction where there is one model that is consistently being the best predictor. And among the 4, you can only compare among the 4 that you've designed. And so what you would like to see is that these things move in the direction of one more consistently being the better predictor. And it would be the one that is receiving the greatest weight of evidence, belief that it is representing the population dynamics of mid-continent mallards.
Yeah, and this is another way that the AHM is adaptive.
Yeah.
Right.
And rigorous.
It's rigorous. It's weighting the performance of the model the year before and the year before and trying to get it.
Yeah, I think it's just such an important point for your average hunter like myself. What actually is considered, what the amount of data sets, the amount of, rigor, like I said, that goes into these decisions is so much more than just the numbers.
Yeah.
I think that's
not paper ducks.
Yeah,
not
it's an extremely
real
important.
ducks that are estimated.
It's an extremely important point. So
We're going to go forward here on our little presentation, and I'm going to show you an animation that we have created with the assistance of our conservation science assistants here in-house. It's something I'd been wanting to do for a while. It took a lot to do, and so what you're going to see is an animation, and it's going to show this matrix. The colors are a little bit different. Red still corresponds to restrictive. Yellow corresponds to the moderate, and then the greenish will correspond to liberal. There's some gray cells in here. These are ones which we didn't really know exactly what they were because the matrix, the domain, on this matrix has changed a little bit through time. And so what we did is we kind of created a common domain across every year. And then we sort of interpolated between some of the that will make no sense to the people that are listening to this. I realize this, but anyway, just trust me that we did this the right way. Even had some of our Fish and Wildlife Service and USGS folks review it, and they say, "Yep, that looks about right." So this is going to give you a reasonable representation of actually how the AHM matrix has in fact changed over time based on a variety of things. It's going to be mostly related to new knowledge that has been gained through the years by comparing those predictions to the observations on population size in the next year. And that's what you see. I got another way we're going to depict these here momentarily, but you'll see the amount of green, the amount of red changing, and you'll from one year to the next. And so it actually does adapt in response to new information. Impressions.
You see one of the things that's really interesting is you see how the red shifts more, right? That restrictive season can shift more. There's more opportunity for that dot to fall in there, depending upon the habitat, and the bee pop from the year before. So
that other little darker green box that you see moving around in there, that was the optimal selection for that given year. I think it's missing in one of those years. It's missing in some of the early years because we couldn't find that data. But the other thing that you notice is that as you go through time, the amount of cells, the number of cells in the moderate package become very, very small. And that is because that's just not the optimal. It's not being identified as as that suite of models as the optimal strategy for achieving one of those objectives, primarily because when you go from it's predicting that when you go from a liberal to a moderate season framework, the harvest rate changes very little. And when you go from a moderate to a restrictive, that harvest rate would change very little. Now, when you go from restrictive to liberal, it changes enough for it to tell you that, okay, there's a difference in the likely impact of one regulatory package versus the other. But you can see, what was that, 2005? We got really close to a moderate season. So yeah, the other thing that I want to point out is what you're seeing right now goes from 1999 through 2021, I believe. And across the top is Canadian ponds. So keep that in mind because we're going to show you a matrix here a little bit later on that's going to include the U.S. ponds as part of this. So, all right, next thing that I'm going to show, I'll jump forward here. This is the other way that we can portray this. The AHM matrix changes through time. This sort of takes each of those matrices, I think either of those will work, right? They will right now.
Yeah.
You can take those and just express the number of those liberal, moderate, and restrictive and closed seasons as a percentage of the total number of cells in that common domain, and you can see how that changes. And you can see how it changed. There were some hard rules put in place around 2001 or so about what the closed season threshold was going to be. That was changed, and then was changed again in 2007. And so then what you in fact see happening is this thing over the past 10 years or so, it began to stabilize around sort of a pretty consistent percentage of each of those regulatory packages.
And that's the model learning from itself and improving each year, right? So it's optimizing, it's finding a pattern, right, that seems to be consistent. And so that's why you're getting a more consistent framework.
It is adaptive.
It is, contrary to popular belief, man. It is. But, okay, so I told Nathan a little while ago that I didn't think we were going to go past noon, but I think he probably knows me better than I know myself because he changed his meeting, and we're getting close to the noon hour.
I think one of the things you'll point out, too, is around AHM, and it's something that's not kind of on that adaptive side, right? It is adaptive, but it's not knee-jerk. It's not reactive, right? Knee-jerk
and it's informed.
Right?
It's based
informed. It's working in a time frame we can actually operate at too, right? So,
and you can have questions about the data. We all do. Yeah, everybody's always looking at it.
It's not perfect, but it's
as many questions as the average hunter, or the informed hunter, or anybody out there thinks they have about it. I guarantee you, the scientific community has that many and more, and they're looking into them.
Right?
Are they looking into them and addressing them fast enough to satisfy the quote critics? No, that's never going to happen because of limitation in capacity and resources, and it's but these questions are being examined. So I've got up another animation, just 3 years in this one, but this is sort of a new matrix. This was supposed to be something that was supposed to be implemented, I believe, in like 2021. And this may get a little detailed, but I'm gonna go here because I think it's important, because when people look at, because I know how people will go back to certain pieces of information and pull it up and try to scrutinize it and so forth and so on. So I want to be completely transparent. I told you a minute ago that when you look at that animated graph for that longer time span, across the top was Canadian ponds. When you look back through history of this breeding population and habitat survey, there were a number of years, maybe 20 years or so, I could be off a little bit on that, when U.S. ponds were not counted. It was only Canadian ponds that were counted. So when it came to the mid-90s for them to develop these population models to try to predict recruitment from habitat conditions, i.e. number of ponds, they looked at two different things. They looked at models that included just Canadian ponds, because you could go back to the mid-50s, a longer data set. And then they looked at a set of models that included ponds from U.S. and Canada, and for that you could only start in the 1970s, let's say, because you can't really include the years prior to that in that model because you didn't have U.S. pond numbers. So you had a shorter data series, and for the longest time, the best performing models were those that included only Canadian ponds. So they're interested in achieving the highest predictive power possible, and because they're trying to make decisions. And even if you don't have all the mechanisms right, as long as you have a strong predictive power for a decision-making process, that's what's important at that point in time. So they had Canadian ponds being the only that pond variable for the longest time. But then you get to the mid-2010s, early 2020s, that data set that includes U.S. ponds becomes long enough that models that include it begin to outperform. This is my understanding of it. Anybody of our state, federal, USGS partners that are listening to this, if I'm saying this wrong, feel free to let me know. We'll do a correction. But eventually, the models, when they compared the models with U.S. plus Canadian ponds to those with only Canadian ponds, the U.S. and Canadian ponds model began to outperform the Canadian ponds. So they made the change because, again, always looking to make improvements and ensure the highest predictive power or predictive potential. when they did that, and now we can look at this this matrix here that's rotating from 23, 24, 25. There is a lot more green on this matrix. This was noticed by all of our Flyway Council tech rep partners. I remember having some conversations with them, and then we were like, whoa, that's a big change.
Yeah.
Now it's based on data. It's based on the best predictive models, but it does represent a big change. What I have not done, and you'd have to go back and sort of parse this out. You'd have to separate out U.S. or you had to separate out Canadian ponds. Where would we be if we were still using Canadian ponds only? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that any of that is actually out there. I guess you could probably get at that. Anyway, it'd take a little bit of work to figure that out. But I haven't seen that. I haven't done that. And I think that matrix would still change from year to year. So anyway, this, again, just being transparent, this is a change that has happened. And so it is still changing from one year to the next.
It is. And if you look at last year's, the 2025 one, when you look at that.
And I can't stop this animation.
You're good.
So.
But where you fall, where the optimal strategy is, if you took a 20% hit in either pond count or population, the model's going to put you in a restrictive, right? A more restrictive season. Yeah. And so it is there in a way where you can see where if the population took a hit or habitat takes a drastic hit, it's going to put you in a season that's more restrictive.
Right. I'm going back here to that matrix for our current year. It's a little bit different, at least in terms of the domain, the extent of the domain, pond numbers and breeding pond, because I kind of wanted to make this where we could read it, so don't be confused by any of that. But this part of it is all the same, the main part that you see as what was just in that animated graphic. But yeah, kind of to your point, Jerad, what was that, 6.5, 20%, if you do or 6.6, 20% of that is what, like 1.3? So somewhere in there. So then that would drop this down to 5.3-ish, right? Mm-hmm. So then that gets you there, right? Yeah. What about ponds? 5.16. If it drops 20%, now you're looking at 4 point something. I mean, you're. Yeah. Yep. So, it's going to be interesting in about a week. When we get
is,
this.
But it's one of those, you don't see. I take that. I mean, you don't see giant swings like that in population, but it can happen, and it has happened. Sure, but it's not the norm.
Yeah, and again, this includes mallards from a portion of that traditional survey area, plus Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I have not looked at the mallard numbers from those three states. They will have some bearing on this.
Yes.
But yeah, so lots to look forward to there. And then pintails. There have been absolutely no questions directed at me this year about pintails. People are absolutely happy. No, I'm just kidding. I've had tons of questions about.
Had somebody ask me this morning
about pintail harvest strategy, and we did have a full length episode with Brandon Reiches and Mike Szymanski, detailing how that came about, what the safeguards are, how it's going to operate. There is no shortage of opinion among hunters on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. The one good thing is that we're going to have data to evaluate what happens. The other good thing is that we're not going to shoot pintails into extinction. Guarantee you that. If the
we're confident enough in the data that harvest has that little of an impact.
If the people that are out there saying that we're going to over-harvest pintails in 1 year are true, or if they're correct, then we'll see that in the harvest numbers. And this harvest strategy will adjust. It'll push it back to a one pintail season, or it'll push it to a closed season. But the one thing that will have happened is that we will have learned, and we are confident that once habitat conditions improve in the important areas for pintails, they will recover. Even in the idea of this presumed feared overharvest by some people, then there will be an opportunity for pintails to recover, and we will have learned a lot, and we will continue to let the harvest strategy work. And if it pushes it back to a 3-bird limit, we'll try it again. You'll collect another data point, and that's how learning occurs. And you have to be willing to do that. And feels like, and by all other sort of superficial accounts, and what we have been sort of geared to believe through a 1 or 2 pintail limit over the past 15 or so years, this feels like a more risky. It's an emotional thing. Feels like a more risky proposition. From a data standpoint, the models say we can do this. So that's the value of data, or that's the difference between emotion and data.
That's it.
So from a scientist standpoint, I'm like super excited about what we're going to learn.
Model. Right?
Absolutely.
You're actually getting
It's a
to see
shock
what
to the
happens.
system.
Yeah.
But the knee-jerk reaction is, oh my gosh. And then the story with pintails is like, it's the haves and have-nots when you're a pintail. If you're someone who is hunting pintails, right? There are some areas that just are loaded up with them, but the average duck hunter might see 1 or 2, right? They're not making up a significant portion of anyone's bag limit.
Yeah. I mean,
of a large portion. There are some places where,
if I see that flock of birds right there, I'm going to try to shoot 3 drakes. No doubt about it. I'm going to let the hen go just because that's the way I am. I mean, that's okay. It's cool. There are no hen restrictions. A lot of people were very puzzled by that. We talked about that with Mike and Brandon. They also believe, and the evidence shows, that hunters are going to favor drakes, just as you said, especially on pintails, especially down, late in the season.
Yeah. A big old bull sprig coming in.
And
he's got a target on his head.
So Mike's their state's philosophy is, why regulate something that people are going to do anyway? They're going to do on their own.
Again, simplifying.
Vast majority of people are going to do that.
Yeah.
And if you are uneasy about, you or your club are uneasy about the no hen restriction, then self-impose one. That's how harvest regulations got started in the first place, was by a lot of those historic duck clubs being concerned and saying, we're going to do our part. If that's what you believe, then do it. But if other people say, I'm going to lean on the science and the data and what these are telling me, and I'm going to shoot 3 pintails, might shoot 2 hens, might shoot 1 hen, might shoot 3 hens someday. I mean, I don't think we should begrudge those people. I think that's part of the learning process and evaluating what's happening here.
And a lot of that's opportunity, right? If you've got the opportunity to shoot 3 drakes, most people are going to do that. But if you got one of those days, one of those seasons where you're just happy to take home 3 ducks, then that's a different story.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. I think I had one more graph, one more matrix. That's a little bit small. You might have to lean in real close on your screen. Now, this is the pintail matrix. And so the harvest strategy for pintails spits out something similar to what the mid-continent mallard AHM model does, where you've got a matrix that simplifies that optimal decision-making framework. Across the top for pintails is mean latitude of settling of the pintails that are counted during the survey. When they're flying these surveys, they're flying along, they'll observe a pintail, they'll count it, they'll log it, they have a geo-reference location. They know where that is. So for all of these pintails, this is how I think they do it. I think this is almost how they have to do it. I don't think they do it at the strata or transect level. They could estimate at the transect level and then kind of extrapolate that. That might actually be what they do. Anyway, the specifics of that I don't know. So sort of caveat there. But generally stated, they will, for the pintails that they either count or that they estimate at some certain small spatial scale, they will have a location tied to those. And then they will calculate, my guess is it's a weighted average of the average location of all of those estimated or counted pintails. And so what they're looking for is what's that average latitude where they counted or estimated all those pintails? Was it down in the prairies or was it up in the boreal forest? Where would you expect it to be this year?
Boreal.
Yeah, because a lot of the birds flew. You expect most of the pintails to be counted or estimated this year to occur in the boreal. So there's going to be a higher mean latitude of observed.
Why is that
good.
factored, Mike?
That's
What's
what I
that?
was going to say.
Why
I
is that
says-
factored?
Assume
Well,
that's reproduction in each of those habitats.
I don't want to get too deep
production.
into that because I don't know. Other than the only thing I know from talking to some of the folks involved in the modeling is that it relates partly, I don't know if it's exclusively, but it relates partly to the fact that prior data sets, prior years of information have indicated that when pintails overfly the prairies, higher mean latitude where they settle, they are more likely to settle in areas that are either unsurveyed, not covered by the aerial surveys,
Gotcha.
or they're settling in areas that are poorly surveyed, where just random location of where they settle
Gotcha.
may result in them being missed or not estimated as representatively as, let's say, an area where they would settle where we have a
Generates.
higher density of transects and so forth.
Generates an underestimate.
That's right. So
Okay.
the higher their mean latitude of settling, the more of an underestimate we believe that number that comes back from the survey actually is. So it's a little counter to what the production thing
wasn't
is.
that. Okay.
Again,
Yep.
this is my understanding.
That
State,
makes sense.
federal partners, if you're listening to this, and if I've got this wrong, send me an email. We'll go on and we'll correct it. But I checked with folks before when we first saw this come out last year. Matt Young said, "Hey, Mike, what's going on here? This seems backwards." We thought they made a mistake in the matrix. We thought they'd flipped it because we were thinking the production side of things.
Right.
We thought the higher the settling latitude, production would be lower, and we thought the higher the settling latitude, the more likely it should be for a restrictive season. But if you look at this, farther out to the right you go, the more likely you are to have a liberal season. And so, although there is in the boreal forest anyway, productivity is likely to be a little bit lower. I still don't think we have a great handle on
Right.
that. But a lot of these pintails are going to overfly even the boreal, and they'll nest in the coastal plain, the Arctic coastal plain, where productivity may be quite high. Maybe they'll fly to Alaska, where in some years productivity is quite high. But this is trying to capture the fact that when they are settling in those more northern landscapes, we're likely to be underestimating the true number that are there. And so then what you
Makes
have on the
sense.
other side here is the breeding population size for pintails in that traditional survey area.
Right.
So
Okay.
clear as mud.
Clear as mud. Well, and that's always really interesting with pintails just because they are, from a breeding ecology standpoint, they're different.
Yeah.
They have some specific habitat requirements.
quirky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, short grass prairies,
Yep.
got a specialist. So
One of the things I'm going to be most interested to see this year is how does this matrix change from year one to year two? How
Right.
does it change?
as the model's learning from a very early standpoint,
Yeah.
that'll be really interesting to see.
You can see there's only 4 cells in this domain area where it would be a 2 pintail limit. It would oscillate between a 3 and a 1 most of the time. That's partly it's related to a couple of things, but partly it's just related to the low predicted difference in harvest rate between a 3-bird and a 2-bird bag. So that's what we got going on there. There's also the blue-winged teal conversation that we've got 9 days this year. Who knows what it's going to be? I'm going to be interested to see what that number is. Are we going to stay at 9 days in 26? Or are we going to jump back up to 16 days? I think most people would probably handicap it and say, we're probably still going to be in a 9-day next year, but we'll see. We'll learn soon enough.
And it was so close. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just
Right.
under the threshold last year that it very easily could,
Yeah.
And blue-winged teal are one of those species that, I mean, like most waterfowl, but they're especially one that you get some wet conditions and, man, they can have a population explosion. So
I do think I saw something, maybe Minnesota, though, numbers. Was it Minnesota or Wisconsin, where blue-winged teal numbers were down surprisingly to surprisingly low levels? But we're working on that on summarizing some of that information. We'll look for an opportunity to try to bring that to folks. But this has been a fun conversation.
Yes.
We have never done this. We didn't really know what we're going to be getting into. Just trying to give people something to get excited about and
better understand what's kind of going on. You went for a ride with us as far as our thought process on here.
I will again say the numbers that are going to come out next week as you're listening to this are not Ducks Unlimited's numbers. Yes, we're going to put them out there. Yes, we're going to put them on our website. We're trying to help communicate these numbers and their implications kind of on behalf of our federal, state partners. Try to get them in the hands of the people that are passionate about these numbers, that care about their implications. They're not DU's numbers. Now, despite me saying that, there will still be people that say, DU just put out their numbers. Okay, so go on believing that. They're not Ducks Unlimited's numbers. We never will take, it's not because we aren't proud of them, but we don't want to take the credit away from the people that actually are doing this work. Fish and Wildlife Service, Canadian Wildlife Service, provincial agencies, state agencies, and a number of other people. I think some of our DU Canada staff, at least in the past, have gotten out and helped with some of the ground surveys. And it's a tremendous amount of work. We want to make sure they get the credit for this. We're just fortunate to be in a position where we can help communicate that.
And that's the thing, is that we have the team and the ability, right, as a partner in that group, to disseminate that information better than U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They don't have a big marketing department, right, or anything like that.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, it certainly it gives you appreciation going through the things that we covered today and what goes into these decisions, both from the survey and the amount of work that goes in. What is it, over 50,000 linear miles that are flown in the course of that or something? I mean, just incredible what our partners go through in order to gather these data sets. And then going through AHM, what actually is involved in that, in those frameworks. It's just, hats off to the people who are putting the work in.
Yeah.
Send us any questions or send us any corrections. Send us any
send
criticisms.
Send them all to Mike.
That's right. Well, dupodcast@ducks.org. Attention, Chris Isaac. And we would love to hear from folks. If you have any questions, let us know. Give us great material to follow up on. And y'all stay tuned next week. Again, as you're listening to this, it should be a big week. Stay tuned to all the DU platforms, social media, web. Might get some emails from us. I think we're going to try to do our waterfowl season outlook live stream again. We're kind of working on that. We don't know the day of that because that's going to be done like the day that the report, our goal is to do that different from years past. We're going to do that the night that the report is released. We do not know when that report is going to be released. Our understanding is that it is going to be the first week of September. Monday is Labor Day. We don't expect it to be that day, so that leaves 4 days. Keep your eyes peeled, folks. And of course, I could be totally wrong, and in which case that's on me. But whatever, we do the best we can, and we appreciate y'all joining us for the ride. Jerad, great to have you here. Thanks for all the great info.
And I really enjoyed just talking about this, and this is a conversation that I have with my friends, and people that I see all the time. So it's really nice to be able to kind of talk through some of these points and get kind of down into not into the nitty gritty, but at the base level, like how this stuff works.
I think it's okay to get into the weeds. The ducks live in the weeds. We can get in the weeds.
We can too.
Proverbial weeds.
Right.
They're actual weeds.
Yeah.
Nathan, great having you be a part of this. Also, this is your year 2 now, where you'll be working on all this stuff with us. So, one more trip. Let's do it.
Thanks, Mike. I've always believed in being in rooms with people smarter than me. So good to
let us know when you figure that out. So. All right. Well, thanks to all of you for joining us. Thanks to my colleagues here in studio. Thanks to Chris Isaac and Rachel Jerad for the incredible work that they do with all these video and audio podcasts. We look forward to y'all spending a lot of time with us next week and in the coming months as we launch headlong into the waterfowl hunting season. Have a good one, y'all.
Thank you for listening to the DU Podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, the official performance dog food of Ducks Unlimited. Purina Pro Plan, always advancing. Also proudly sponsored by Bird Dog Whiskey and Cocktails. Whether you're winding down with your best friend or celebrating with your favorite crew, Bird Dog brings award-winning flavor to every moment. Enjoy responsibly. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit ducks.org/DU podcast. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.